Welcome to Devotion with Donna. This evening we are going to look at Matthew chapter 13. We're going to look at the parable of the sower. And I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 13 beginning in verse 3, and we're going to read through the parable of the sower. But I want to let you know we're going to be doing this particular series in 4 parts, and I'll explain a little bit more about that after I read through the parable of the sower. So let's begin. Matthew chapter 13, beginning in verse 3. Then Jesus, spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places, where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up, because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. If you continue reading in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus goes on to explain why he talks in parables. And then after he goes on to explain about why he talks in parables, he explains the parable of the sower to his disciples. And with that, this is what we're going to do in 4 parts, is the explanation of the parable of the sower, because there's 4 parts that Jesus explains. He explains the word or the seed by the wayside, the seed on stony places, the seed among the thorns, and the seed on good ground. And we're going to look at all 4 of those separately in Devotion with Donna. And today, we're going to look at the first part. Therefore, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received seed by the wayside. When we think about the word that gets sown into our lives, the word of God, though it says here the word of the kingdom, what God is doing, testimonies of God's goodness and grace. And when we read the word or we hear a teaching, we hear a message, we hear a preaching, the word of God that's being sown into our hearts, the word of God that's being sown into our lives. It says here, Jesus says, when they hear the word and do not understand it, it's in the lack of understanding that the enemy comes and snatches away what was sown in the heart. The good seed that was sown on our hearts, the good seed sown by the wayside, is snatched up by the enemy. And we think about people that we're praying for, that we want to hear the word of God, that we want to share the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. We want to share the good news of Jesus Christ. We want to share the good news of what God is doing in our lives. We want to share that with them, but they dismiss it. They don't listen. They don't hear it. And it's because they do not understand it. And I like to think about when we're praying for people that we're sharing Jesus with, or we're going to share Jesus with, we need to pray and ask that the Father would draw them to himself, that the Father would give them hearts to understand the word that is going to be sown into their lives. So the enemy cannot come and snatch that word away. The enemy cannot come and snatch that word that was sown into their heart, so that they can understand it, so that they can hear it. So that seed has an opportunity to grow in their heart and in their lives, to make a difference and to make a change. So Jesus said, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, it's in the lack of understanding that the enemy comes. Because it says, then, with the lack of understanding, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received seed by the wayside. So we need to be praying for people as we're sharing Jesus with them, as we're sharing the gospel of the kingdom, as we're sharing testimonies of people being healed, people being set free, people being delivered, people's lives being changed by the goodness and grace of God. We need to pray that they have hearts of understanding, that the enemy would not come and snatch away that good seed that was sown into their lives. And with that understanding, that seed will have an opportunity to take root and an opportunity to grow in their lives, that they too can be changed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I want to thank you for joining me today as we began to look at the parable of the sower. And we're going to come back and we're going to look at the rest of these, the rest of what Jesus says about explaining the parable of the sower. So this is just part 1 of 4, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.